Hello, everyone. Good morning from the Pacific Coast. It's really an honor to have this third day with you, all virtually. My name is Rebecca Burgess, and I'm the founder and director of Fibershed. And day three, we are so excited that you could make it to this extended virtual time together. And I would love to know from all of you where you are coming from. So those of you who can use the chat is a place for us to communicate to each other and discuss topics between one another and ideas you're having. And so I was actually hoping this morning that, we have Northern Sweden, Portland, Oregon, Cindy Cornell from Eastern New York. Oh my goodness. Berkeley, Nashville, Tennessee, Wales, the Bronx, Pleasant Hill, Germany, West Virginia, Seattle, Washington, Iowa, Maine. Woo! Thank you. Belgium. Oh, Kat from Mendocino. Greenfield, Massachusetts, Samantha, Michelle McCroskey, Detroit. Oh, all right. Well, you can see the diversity of locations and the brilliant encounters we can all have today using the chat. I'm very excited for the potential of this, so continue to use the chat. My goodness, love that you're coming from so many places. Again, another side benefit of going virtual is this opportunity to engage so many people from so many locations. So for housekeeping today, as this beautiful flow of information keeps coming through the chat, and keep it coming. We also have, as we go through the day and you hear a speaker or you hear a panelist, you can use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. The Q&A is for content-specific questions. So, and then in the chat as well, just back to the chat for a moment, if you have any questions about technical things, or, where's the program, or how do I do this or that, the chat's a great place for technical questions. The Q&A at the bottom of the screen where you can click is really specific for content. So you have a really meaty question you would like to ask a panelist or a speaker, that's the question you would put into the Q&A. All right, so for today, we are focusing on regionally grown, regionally made, regionally worn. And I just want to inspire us all to think about our home communities as landscapes of opportunity, landscapes for uplifting that and who and what is already there, as well as inspiring entrepreneurialism, new businesses. We have so much opportunity to harness and to inspire, to recreate regional economies that allow us to have access to something so basic as our second skin. It's as food, water, your second skin, your shelter. Again, these are such primary components of a human's ability to thrive. And thus they are so important that we think about these systems as being accessible, being regional, and all the players from soil to skin being treated well and being honored for their contributions. So I'm going to take a few minutes before our spotlight speaker today to frame, as I have been doing the last 2 days, to frame the conversation up a little bit for you. Let's see, screen share. And again, thanks for all of your contributions in the chat. It's so lovely to see you all. All right, so here we go. I just want to remind us all, when, here I am today, I'm wearing a beautiful Jacob's wool poncho from Robin Lined that was, grown on her farm, spun at a local mill, and then, or maybe a domestic mill in this case, and then woven on her farm. It's very clear to me that a lot of our work as makers and designers means that, we're very focused on our own making process. And I just wanted to inspire a moment where we think about actually how big this textile system is, We call it a textile industry, but there's, we want to actually pull some aspects of this industrial system. We want to transform it. We want to create a bridge between industry and the cottage scale, and we want to actually humanize this system. And so to understand it is important, and we often as makers, maybe don't think about global economics as much. Maybe we are. It's, there's lots of diverse approaches to understanding how we're going to regionalize our economic systems related to textiles. But just as a reminder, the global textile industry has a value of 900 billion, and it's projected to grow to around 1.2 trillion, I should say, between 2025 and 2027, with a compounded annual growth rate of 4.3 to 4.4%. What this means is there is so much actual wealth circulating, but who it's circulating to is quite another question that we will explore today. But there is no doubt that the size of this industry and its power globally is something that each of our communities could begin to harness through decentralization and circulating dollars more equitably within these decentralized hubs, which we will explore in today's systems of conversation. So this report, Market Research Assessing Demand for Global and US Sustainable Textiles, Scott Ragsdale, Sarah Kelly, Jenny O'Connor, Calla Rose Ostrander, we're all contributors. This report will go out to you if you are interested. I know many of you are coming from international locations, and just to say that this research is something that does have an international component to it. So if you are interested in this report and you're from another part of the world, there is a discussion of global value chains in this report, and we'll make sure that you have access to it. So this is market-driven lingo, but I just want to make sure as communities we understand how much opportunity there is for our grassroots communities to take part in the prosperity that is in this industry. So the Grandview Research report of 2019 showed that ecofiber, and ecofiber is natural fibers, but it also includes reconstituted cellulose like lyocell, tensile, etc. This report found that the opportunity assessment for the US is arguably the most favorable of any country, reflecting the intersection of market revenue size with the projected compounded annual growth rate for ecofibers in that country. According to this research, the total market for the United States ecofibers is projected to grow from 6.4 billion in 2014 to 14.3 billion in 2025. This is a compounded annual growth rate of 8.2%, which is actually higher than what I quoted in the global compounded annual growth rate. So in other words, the US has the largest and the fastest growing demand for ecofibers. It's just an important reminder, but all the European countries and countries in South America, as well as in Asia, the growth is upward in all of these locations. So just to inspire us, and just again, how my community's been thinking about these opportunities. We've done a ton of work in understanding the landscape, like how do we start harnessing these opportunities and ground truthing them here. Well, first we had to do landscape assessments. So we figured out, oh my gosh, we're the largest wool producer in the country in California. We're already growing 439 million pounds of cotton. Now, it's not to say that there aren't, as you know, this whole symposium has been about how to improve the historic social inequities within agriculture. We've discussed that in a panel yesterday. We have discussed the issues with natural fiber systems related to synthetic nitrogen. We know there's improvements, and that's what Fibershed is working on. How do we harness the low-hanging fruit fibers that are already here, but make improvements, more environmental and social equity improvements to these systems? You will hear today from a wonderful set of speakers the reality of 65,000 garment workers in the greater Los Angeles region, comprising the single largest textile-focused workforce in the United States. You know, this is incredible talent pool of people who know so well how to compose a garment. The issues there are around absolutely are around equity and material uplift, and we will get into this. In our community, we've also analyzed that we have a robust designer and brand community. We have so many public and private educational institutions with textile and fashion departments. So the work is, how do you take all of this existing talent and skill and opportunity and weave it together? And that's what today is about. And we're, you know, showcasing this through the lens of our place and our geography, but you know, all of this is translatable to your places. So as we decentralize these textile systems into regional hubs, we must think about decentralizing the economy in ways that benefit and ensure the material uplift of everyone contributing to the soil to skin pathway. On the left, Laura Kincaid has just finished shearing a sheep. Often our sheep shearing community, they are shearing sheep whose wool is not even covering the cost of the shearing activity. We have an undervalued natural biodegradable resource in our community. Farmers have a very hard time in many cases actually just covering the basic costs of caring for an animal like the shearing process, because the wool has so little value in so many cases. And then our speakers today will discuss the photo on the right in more depth. But here's an example. This is from the Garment Workers Center, who we will hear from in just a moment, about, you know, how many people are actually putting the textile together here in California, and the dire need to pay attention to and attend to the needs of the community who is not being paid at all at appropriate levels for the work that they are doing, for really to clothe people not only in California but elsewhere. Let's see. So the panel today will be focused on regionally grown, regionally made, regionally worn, and from a housekeeping perspective, you can stay on this track. If you've been here with us for 2 days, you know we've been having simultaneous tracks. Today you can stay in one track all day. So that leads me to introducing the speakers.
Hey, Rebecca, can I just jump in real quick?
Oh,
There's some
course.
really great chat things that are going on just before you introduce.
Yeah, please.
Colleen was asking everyone, I'm curious to know how many people in attendance identify as an owner, operator, a worker, or something else. So if people wanted to put that in the chat, that would be a great way. What do you think?
I think so. Yes. So if you could, in the chat, let us know what part of the soil to skin pathway you are taking part in. So like for me, it would be my history as a natural dyer or a weaver. If you are doing cut and sew, if you are mending, if you are knitting, let us know in the chat. We would love to know. And Janice, educator, awesome. If you are teaching at a design school, let us know. All right. So as you're, oh my goodness, thank you. Look at that. Weavers, educators, designers, store managers, creative designers, master's degree students. Woohoo! Good, amazing. And we will keep reading through those. I'm gonna pivot slightly to introducing our next speaker. I'm so grateful for her participation and speakers. Let's see here. So Annie Shaw, who I can see now in the field. Hi, Annie. Annie Shaw is the outreach coordinator at the Garment Workers Center. She studied fine arts and began supporting the labor movement by working closely with Domino's Pizza food delivery workers in New York City during Occupy. At the Garment Workers Center, she founded the Espacio Creativo. It's not well said, sorry. A creative space that combines skill training, political education, and art making. Annie now leads the Garment Workers Center's High Road project, and Annie is also very involved in local organizing against gentrification and community displacement. And Annie will be presenting today with Santa Puac. And Santa's bio, just want to, okay. I was just looking, we just got Santa's bio, and so maybe, on Annie, would you actually mind doing that introduction for me? It just got lost in the chat. Our chat blew up beautifully.
No problem. So Santa is a garment worker based in Los Angeles, and she is a mother of three and a leader at Garment Workers Center that has been leading the fight in changing the fashion industry from bottom up. And Santa, bienvenido.
Gracias, Annie.
Okay. ¿Puede entrar video, por favor?
Heads
Ahorita
up.
lo voy a
Oh,
entender.
it works.
Ya.
Ya sirve.
Yeah.
Okay, qué bueno.
And yeah, I also just want to lift up and welcome Mel Reyes, who's also an amazing organizer and supporting us with translation today.
Thank you all. Santa, thank you. Mel, thank you.
Igualmente, gracias.
Oh, gracias. All right. So I think, Annie, if you wanted to, however you'd like to start by sharing your slides, I'm going to mute myself, but let us know if you need anything.
Great. Ian, would you mind starting to start our slides now, please? Wonderful. Make LA Sweatshop free. I think this is probably the goal, the one eternal goal that has been the center of Garment Workers Center. Garment Workers Center is a 19-year organization. Next slide. And these are some of our members. About 19 years ago, there was a very famous case called El Monte Thai slavery case. And actually, if you can see the middle of this person, this was one of our legal advisor and support and leader, Julie Su, who will be likely going to be, who is the California Labor Secretary now. 19 years ago, there was a garment worker case where workers in El Monte, a group of Thai workers in El Monte, was working in a locked house situation. Can I have the next slide, please? This is the house that they were working on, and it's kind of hard to see, but if you look at the gate, there's actually barbed wire. And inside this complex, it was actually a sweatshop where a group of 76 garment workers were sewing for over 6 to 7 years in a locked house situation. Majority of these workers were from Thailand, and they were human trafficked to Los Angeles, thinking that they might be doing some kind of other work other than sewing, and instead they were sewing in this house for about 6 to 7 years until one of the workers escaped and looked for help. And at that time, it brought together a coalition of community community organizations along with labor organizations that supported these leaders to basically break free. And they end up getting asylum and was able to stay in the United States or returned to Thailand with their permission. They were not deported. That was the foundation of Garment Worker Center. Next slide. This is the inside of the sweatshop. At that time, you know, garment industry was about 120 workers strong. And, you know, we remain to be the center of garment production in Los Angeles, in fact, in the United States today. But what you're seeing then, while this was a very special case, it was the first case that's deemed slavery actually since the abolition of slavery. However, there are still very, very, very poor working conditions in the garment industry. Next slide, please. Now, in order to change that working condition, we've been organizing. Garment Worker Center is very much a workers-led organization. And this is actually a picture of our recent, about 3-4 years ago, when we did the Ross campaign, and we went all the way up to San Francisco and to protest one of the biggest hire of sweatshops, which is Ross. But you know, We also did some sightseeing, and this is kind of how we organize, which is both with resilience and joy. Next picture. Yeah, so this was one of our action that was at the Ross headquarters at Dublin, where we actually interrupted a shareholder meeting. This was at that time our lead organizer, Mar Martinez, that actually went inside the headquarter in the shareholder meeting to disrupt and challenge the CEO, Barbara Rentler, and the board members on why they have been creating sweatshop conditions in Los Angeles, and are they going to hold themselves accountable for the poor working conditions and low wages in the garment industry. And surrounding them were our leaders, press and allies. Yeah, and so this has always been the way we organize. Next slide. Yes, and this is bringing us back in LA in one of our picket that was also in front of a Ross store in Los Angeles. And you can see more of our leaders just bringing worker power to make changes. Next slide. I want to give a little bit of a context of Los Angeles garment industry today, 19 years forward. Approximately, even despite globalization, despite online sales and all of that, we are the retail apocalypse. We are still at least 45,000 garment workers strong in Los Angeles. And in California, we believe that it is 60,000 workers. So there are workers that are producing in Central Valley. There are workers that are also producing in San Francisco and Northern California. We are remaining to be the second largest manufacturing industry in Los Angeles, second to transportation, actually. And we are the largest remaining manufacturing in the United States. So when a piece of clothing that says it's made in USA, it's actually often made in Los Angeles. We believe that still we are at least around 4,000 contractors, and that is only, right, 4,000 contractors registered, right? There are a lot of contractors that are doing mom and pop businesses that are unregistered. Why is the Los Angeles garment industry so, so long-lasting? One of the reasons is that our accessibility to the ports and labor force make LA an ideal place for garment production. So now I want to give Santa, next slide, please. So now I want to give Santa a moment to share kind of her leadership and her story. So, hola, Santa. Santa, can you share with us a little bit about your experience as a garment worker in Los Angeles and who you are?
So, hola, Santa. Queremos que comparta más sobre su liderazgo y su historia. Puede compartir sobre su historia como trabajadora de la industria de prendas y ¿quién eres?
En primer lugar, buenos días a todos. Mi nombre es Santa, soy de Guatemala.
So good morning, everybody. My name is Santa. I'm from Guatemala.
He sido trabajadora de la costura como por 15, 16 años desde el año que he llegado en este país. Pues mi experiencia en la costura siempre ha sido mala.
Okay, so I've been a garment worker for about 15 to 16 years since I got here, and well, my experience has always been a bad one.
De trabajar en las fábricas, pues la verdad pues es muy mala, diría yo. En primer lugar, trabajamos en las fábricas donde no nos dan un trato que merecemos.
So the work in the factories has been very bad. First of all, they don't give us the contracts that we deserve.
Las fábricas siempre están muy sucias, no hay agua, no hay papel de baño, no hay ningún trato que digamos que esté limpio la cocina o algo. Muchas veces las fábricas son pequeñas, ni cocina tienen.
So the factories, there's no water, they're always dirty, there's no toilet paper, there's no contract or any agreement to keep the spaces clean, and the kitchen's always dirty.
Y además tienes que trabajar 12, 13 horas para que ganas unos 60, 50 dólares, porque el trabajar la costura, todo te pagan por pieza o te pagan por centavos.
Dijo, ¿cuántas horas? 12?
De 12 a 14 horas.
So you have to work around 12 to 14 hours to really just make 50 to 70 bucks.
Santa, can you tell us a little bit about how many years you have been in the industry and what brought you to the industry?
¿Nos puede decir cuántos años ya está en la industria y qué le trajo a este lugar, a esta industria de trabajar?
Pues tengo como 15 a 16 años de estar trabajando en el país, aquí o en el centro.
¿Era una pregunta?
Trabajando en las fábricas.
15 o 16 años.
Mm-hmm.
So she's been working in the factories for 15, 16 years.
Mm-hmm. Was she also working in the factories in Guatemala as well?
¿También estuvo trabajando en las fábricas en Guatemala también?
No.
Oh, so she started here.
Yeah.
So I think one more question before I move forward is, Santa, why did you decide to join Garment Worker Center?
So, otra pregunta antes que seguimos con la presentación. ¿Por qué se decidió Santa de unirse con el Centro de Trabajadores de Costura?
Pues la verdad porque estaba viendo mucha explotación, mucho robo de salario. Yo me uní porque yo era por robo de salario, la explotación.
Okay, so I was seeing a lot of exploitation. She was seeing a lot of exploitation, a lot of wage theft, and she primarily joined because of all of that.
Gracias, Santa. Yeah, so, I think one thing that's really important to also highlight is that majority of the workforce are, migrant, supported by the migrant population, right? Majority of folks are coming from countries and places that have a probably garment industry. I mean, while Santa did not work in the factories in Guatemala, certainly Guatemala has a lot of production, and so a lot of our folks often were producing even in the country that they are from. And so this is an industry that's very much supported, right, actually by a global migration kind of population. And about 60% of our workforce are women of color. Within it, that include actually trans women of color as well. And then another thing is majority today is supported by Central American and Indigenous and Latinx population. So I think it's really important to name that while, right, like we can all kind of blanket it to kind of this category of people of color, it is still actually a very diverse workforce within it from different culture, different origin, but one thing that tie people together is one, maybe they have experience from the place of their origin. And secondly, it is a shadow industry that completely rely on a migrant population. And it thrives on the fact that folks are new migrants here that might not have language skills, but have other sewing skills, to make a profit. So I'm going to now take a moment to talk about kind of what is the supply chain liability and the Garment Protection Act. So Santa, right, says that she typically work about 65 to 70 hours a week. right? And in East LA, making $300 to $325, less than $5 an hour. This was an article actually on LA Times this year that details how come fashion retailers are not held responsible for such egregious working condition. Next slide. So this is, yeah, there we go. So one of the main culprit that create this sweatshop condition and low wages is the piece rate system. So this is actually from New York Times, that basically a tank top, a worker is paid average 51 cents to create a tank top due to piece rate. So the top would be 3 cents each, each seam, as you can see, it's very kind of hard to regulate, right? 5 cents on the seam, on the neck, and many people here I know are fashion designers. We all know that there's no one t-shirt, no one same pair of jeans that are actually made the same way, right? So it's impossible for a worker to go back and be like, actually, I sewed the top and I want double wages. I want 6 cents now. Can I have the neck be 20 cents? It's incredibly difficult to navigate piece rate. Next. The other part that enables this kind of condition is the subcontracting scheme. And I think the subcontracting scheme and the subcontracting debates particularly have been highlighted these days by the Uber, the driver, our recent Prop 22, unfortunate loss on Prop 22. But really, these kind of scheme started very much at the garment industry. Garment industry is one of the first to organize up to 100 years ago, right? And any methods of corporations trying to crush garment organizing, a lot of them comes from the garment industry. The subcontracting scheme, if you look at the slide, starts with the brand being on top, retailers being on top that holds majority of the profit. And what they do is they will contract out, right, to manufacturers such as Chong Dress, right? So the retailer here could be, the company that Santa worked for was called actually Good American and Frame. These were the two companies, okay? Good American hired, this is an actual case with Santa. Good American hired Chong Dress as a manufacturer to produce their clothing. Chong Dress then subcontract to third-party contractors where Santa was working. And by the time this kind of pyramid scheme goes down to Santa, Santa is making pennies, okay? So majority of the profit, as you can tell, retain on the retailer and brand level, and price setting also, the control completely depends on especially the retailers. Next. So who is liable, right, for Santa's stolen wages? Because not paying workers minimum wage is illegal. It is illegal. While piece rate is not illegal, not paying worker minimum wage is illegal. So when Santa came to Garment Worker Center to file a case, what happened is that even though she won her judgment, Frame claimed that the brand had no knowledge of the third-party claim, right? Frame and Good American can just be like, these were subcontracting issues. This is not my problem. That's what Uber is trying to say. It's like, oh, independent contractor, you guys have your freedom, right? None of my business. Chong Dress claimed that they also worked for a third company. Oh, they're just working for a different place. This is not, we were just subcontracting it out. And meanwhile, what happened to the actual manufacturer that Santa worked for? They cut and run, right? Because these are much smaller shop floors that are created intentionally to escape liability quickly. Because a lot of times they themselves cannot afford to pay for the stolen wages. So what do? They ghost, right? So Santa and her family, right, could be owed tens of thousands of dollars of wages, and they can't go to any of these three parties for the judgment. So US Labor Department studies show that contractors receive just about 73% of what the price is needed to support them to receive a bare minimum wage, right? So the way these contracts are created from on top, right, make it impossible for contractors to actually ever pay workers like Santa a minimum wage. Next. So I will give a very egregious example, okay? So Ross Dress for Less, right? Ross Dress for Less, Ross Stores is a $15 billion revenue company, okay? So there's this narrative, right, that folks like to say, oh, if we ever pay our workers minimum wage, you know, like we'll lose jobs and we'll lose profit. But the disparity is huge. Ross Dress for Less, this is the CEO, Barbara Rendler. She lives in a penthouse in one of the most expensive real estate in New York City, you know, in downtown Manhattan, you know, multi-million billion dollars of profit. You know, Ross Dress for Less actually is net worth more than American Airlines, okay? They were known for hiring over 11 contractors in Los Angeles. They were caught hiring 11 contractors to have produced in sweatshop wages for years. This is decades. People, some of our workers, leaders, and you can see these are our worker leaders, our old judgment that protested them, have worked for them for literally decades, you know, and they claim that they do not have to need to be accountable, right, for the workers' stolen wages. Next. So these are some of the, we call them 30 dozen. Every year, right before Thanksgiving, right before Black Friday, we call these folks out. So we have Forever 21, Ross, you know, Fashion Nova is the newcomer now. They produce about 80% in Los Angeles, Urban Outfitters, you know, and there's other stuff like Macy's, Nordstrom's actually, Charlotte Russe, which just went bankrupt, but, you know, TJ Maxx, you know, they actually all are still producing in Los Angeles. Ross, since we had a case on them and protest and organized them, their contractors has cut and run, but really a lot of these companies still in kind of in the underbelly still producing. Next slide. So Santa talked a little bit about the working condition, right, in the garment factory. You know, wage theft is not only a money issue. Wage theft creates a pressure for workers to work in unsafe speed, right? Because the more you work, the more you make, right? So that's the problem with piece rate. And this is the sustainable, you know, fabric community understand very well the impact of synthetic fabric, you know, and environmentally unsafe fabric. Workers are often the first to be the most impacted, right, by the fabric that we create. So asthma, bronchitis, you know, lint, dyes, right? The average worker are said to have touched a piece of fabric at time, you know, a piece of clothing at times over 5,000. A piece of clothing have been touched by 5,000 hands, okay? There's low wages, of course, create poor nutrition cases. Next. And health and safety, other things are like, you know, if you're working under such pressure, you're not going to a bathroom, you know, creating, you know, urinary tract infections, you know, and repetitive motion injury. And of course, right, a very abusive working environment creates, you know, depression and anxiety. Next. You know, so what can we do, right? Actually, before we go there, I did want to see if we can bring Santa back in a little bit. Is she still here? Santa, can you talk a little bit about what has COVID make, you know, what are the factories look like during COVID?
Santa, ¿puedo hablar un poco más de cómo se ve las fábricas ahorita con COVID, con la pandemia?
Sí, La verdad ahorita pues es lo mismo como estaba antes, todo sucio. Bueno, tal vez tienen mascarillas, pero la verdad del ingenio, nada ha cambiado, todo sigue ahora, pues es la que estábamos comentando con las compañeras, pues debería de estar ahora más un poco limpio, pero nada, es lo mismo, todo sucio, todos con ratones, microondas sucios, no tienes ningún lugar para sentarte, un chiquito cuartecito tiene como 20, 15 personas adentro, pues no hay espacio ni como para dar un poco de espacio a los compañeros.
Okay, so it's all basically the same. It's still as dirty, like the hygiene of the place is the same. Maybe like there's people wearing masks now, but I was talking with my other coworkers, and we were saying how right now it should actually be cleaner, right, because of the pandemic. But you have like these small rooms with up to 20 people in it, and it all is basically the same, if not worse.
Yeah.
Además, mucha gente se han contagiado en las fábricas. Ahorita lo que están haciendo los patrones cuando te contagias o te miran enfermo, pues te despiden, despidan a las personas que están contagiados o enfermas, agarran otras personas, pues es la que están haciendo y nada de que tengan ni siquiera para desinfectar las manos, sin papel en los baños, es la misma cosa.
All right. And then also another thing that's been going on is that a lot of people have been getting sick in these factories. And when bosses see that they're sick or that they know they're sick, what they do is just let them go. They just fire them. And there's also like no support in trying to stay clean in the sense that they don't even have hand sanitizer. There's no napkins and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, in the beginning of the pandemic, you know, like really, even though a lot of factories shut down, you know, when they returned, there were very little supplies that was available, you know, and certainly I think some of the folks are familiar with even like a company like LA Apparel end up having outbreak up to 400 workers being sick, you know, and that's actually already, you know, what's known being a better paid factory. You know, it's an incredibly difficult place to regulate and also keep safe and clean. So let's talk a little bit. I want to kind of get us to the end so I can answer some of the questions, but I will say, so what would multilateral accountability look like, right? This is Richard Cho, the president of Korean Apparel Manufacturer Association, which typically would be seen as, you know, the kind of our opposition. What is that why is that the liability doesn't go all the way up, right, to the one that has written the bad purchase order? Why does it always have to end with the contractor and the manufacturers? And the truth is, when we talk to a lot of businesses, that is something that, you know, folks have shared with us, is that actually the liability should be going all the way up. You know, next slide. So this is why, after fighting Ross for 3 years and with a lot of difficulty, we decided that it was really time for us to change the legislation. And this is why the past year we launched the Garment Worker Protection Act. Garment Worker Protection Act will eliminate the piece rate that has enabled employers to avoid paying workers minimum wage, right? Minimum, that doesn't mean if you make above piece rate, above minimum wage, there can't be like award for you producing better and nicer or more, but minimum wage is minimum. It should be the base. It shouldn't be the goal. That's not the ceiling. We're not trying to make minimum wage the ceiling. It should be the floor, you know. So, and also it creates a easier accountability for workers to negotiate for wages. Next. And another part is, you know, the bill will ensure that all the entities responsible for the garment workers, you know, wage theft are being held liable, right? We're not saying that manufacturers won't be held liable or, you know, it should be all parties being held liable across the process so that workers have access to all three, right, level of production, right? Because after all, their labor feeds into all three level of their profit, right? Simple as that. Without the workers, there's no product, period. Next. And we also actually having a big part of my work the past year is talking to businesses or ethical producers that are actually doing a lot more than Ross, than Barbara Redler in her penthouse, and talking to making sure that, right, you know, at least some kind of discussion is happening in the shop floor about minimum wage or better working condition, or even better fabric, which yields to healthier working environment, okay? So we actually strongly believe that this bill is good for business and it's good for jobs, because better paid workers yields better product, right? Safer working condition actually means that ultimately it's going to be less expensive and riskful for businesses. And then lastly, right, we having spent the past year talking to a lot of sustainable brands that are young, new, everyone really want a much more level playing field so that they're not getting crushed by these like giant order that end up being very exploitative and were very wasteful in the environment, you know. And again, we continue to talk to many businesses or, you know, young fashion brand owners that are actually doing more work than a, you know, billion-dollar CEO on ensuring that the contractors are at least treating workers in some kind of fair places. It's the fair working conditions. Next. So this is the part that I think I want to pass on to Santa. And if you can see, Santa is actually with her kids here. She was one of the first member along with our group that actually went and started advocating for our Senator Maria Elena Duarzo to launch the Garment Worker Protection Act. So this is one of the first visits that they did. So Santa, can you talk a little bit about why it's so important for us to change the law?
Santa, ¿puedes hablar un poco de por qué es tan importante que nosotros cambiemos la ley?
Pues la verdad, para nosotros es muy necesario de que la ley que se cambie para que en un futuro tengamos un buen trabajo, un buen salario, un horario que sea justo, en especial así como nosotros las mamás.
So for us, it's very important that we change the law. It's important that we have a fair wage, that we have fair working conditions, that we have a fair schedule too.
La pasamos más tiempo en el trabajo y menos con nuestros hijos, pero pues por poquito dinero, pues la verdad a veces no alcanza para nuestras necesidades.
As moms, sometimes we end up spending more time in the factories than we do with our kids for little pay, but you know, it's out of necessity.
Yeah, and so continue.
A veces nosotros nos enfermamos en el trabajo, pues nadie, no te dan tu día, pues si estás enfermo y el patrón te está diciendo por qué no llegaste. A los patrones no les importa si tú te enfermas, enferman tus hijos, pues si faltaste un día, pues el patrón ya estará enojado, no te... pues ese día ha escuchado como los demás que agarran día, que cubran los días de enfermedad. Y ahí en la costura eso no existe.
So sometimes, you know, we get sick or our children get sick and our bosses don't like that. And I've heard of like sick days that people use to cover, you know, when they get sick, but in the garment industry that doesn't exist.
Yeah, and so exactly. So Santa, why, you know, what can people do to support us right now?
So Santa, ¿qué pueden hacer la gente para apoyarnos ahorita?
Pues yo diría que así como ahora hubo las llamadas con los congresistas y en eso nos apoyarían, o, o así como en las redes sociales publican muchas cosas importantes, si ellos nos ayudaran a llegar a más personas.
So, you know, like calling Congress people, calling representatives, and also social media, posting things, since a lot of things exist on there now, just sharing information and making posts regarding like what we're doing.
Gracias, Santa. And yeah, so I want to open up for some Q&A very quickly. I know we're running out of time.
Oh, no worries. It's all, can I say, just jump in for one moment, just a reflection that if, on a unity perspective, Colleen wrote, it's really important to call out big fast fashion, and this issue is replicated all the way down the line and even into our artisan mills, and we use this justification of remaining competitive as a reason to underpay and undervalue the labor workers. This happens at all levels, and we need to see that with both eyes open. It's with farms, farm labor, and just wanted to hit on that point because so many of the people in our chat and in our audience are working and producing and trying to sell items that include the whole cost of production. And it keeps getting seen as this, oh, that's too expensive, right? And so we have this, where we unify here across this landscape from farm to skin, from artisan to the industrial systems, is that if everyone across those lines is lifted up, then we can't be controlled by this idea of like, oh, this is too much and I can go over here and skirt over here and get this for less. Like, we need to protect everyone in this whole textile conversation, wherever you find yourself in the system, because if we can't do that, we're never gonna, it's just a race to the bottom will keep occurring. And that has happened, as we know, with $40 billion worth of unpaid, well, I guess it's now at 22 billion of unpaid, because the pay up campaign has been so successful, but there's still unpaid textile due to COVID for countries like Bangladesh, where brands just didn't even pay. And Remake and Elizabeth Klein and other Garment Workers Center have been doing great work on that. But to me, it's like everyone at every level coming together and being aware of this issue is so important. So I just want to codify that comment by Colleen. We see these issues in our home community with small farms and, you know, people working at a micro level are still experiencing the work of their life not valued. So back to questions.
Rebecca, we have Christina Wheeler in the Q&A if you'd like to read that one out.
Okay. So Christina Wheeler asks, why is the Labor Board halting on issuing new contractor permits during COVID? You'd think they'd want to keep people safe, being able to work out of their own space, plus being able to take on work during the time of the layoffs, creating one's own better working conditions.
I think that's a really interesting question. This is probably something later on in a panel our director can answer. I'm actually not as familiar as that pocket of work because I mostly do business outreach. However, I will say that one, I think it could be because of, you know, COVID also is impacting the office, the way they process these registration and licensing. And secondly, to be really honest, it is very difficult to ensure better, safe, and working conditions right now. So I think there could be a combination of factors between bureaucracy, safety, and also just you know, focusing on the task and monitoring what's already existing.
Thank you. Let's see, there was a question about, is there a list of garment workers? Actually, there's someone who'd like to be an employer. And Annie, you and I have spoken about this list of, you know, these young brands, not young, maybe young to the consumer. Like they're newer, or they've been around and haven't had the voice, but they're emerging in this ethical space.
Mm-hmm.
Is there groups of people who want to go out on their own and start serving and being part of a different ecosystem of textile supply chain?
Yeah, and
Hubs?
when I just now, the last slide I showed was to show a big, we were actually, to be honest, quite surprised how many business support we have gotten for the bill initially. And we used to think that the bill was the end goal, and then we realized that actually the bill is absolutely the beginning and a requirement for all folks who wants to hire our workers, right? Because you need to support our bill in order to, it's basic promise that you are going to pay folks minimum wage, and also that, do your best in providing kind of up the chain liability, which we see happening with smaller fashion, kind of sustainable fashion folks.
They're willing to put forward a purchase order.
A lot more questions than big corporations. And this is why we really actually believe that the the Protection Act itself is actually a really important way to protect the sustainable fashion business and its growth, right?
Absolutely.
Often we hear that what makes it hard is because they have to compete really large contracts that are really ridiculous, actually, right? So I think that's the bill is the beginning. Anyone that is interested in hiring or talking more about that, we do. That's my job. So I am going to blast my email here, and please outreach to me. But you can also sign the petition. And yes. I'm actually going to send a specific endorsement form that's for brands and organizations.
Good.
So that, and what will happen is after you sign it, I will be in touch with you. So workercenter.org, that's my email. And there is a specific endorsement form. This is for business and organizations.
Wonderful. Because there's been this myth that if somehow, I frankly just don't understand this argument, because of the brands that we work with want to absolutely do everything in a transparent way and be able to point to how exciting that transparency and ethic, their ethic translates across their whole community of people who contribute to their clothing. This argument comes out like, we've talked about this, oh, if we raise wages, the jobs will disappear. And this is an argument that I just simply, we can't continue in this way. It's just, this is a dead end of paying people piece rate, making $5 and less an hour. It has to just end. And so we need to lift up the whole system. And you've told me before that even in the finished garment, making minimum wage might take like a $16 shirt and turn it into an $18 shirt. Most of the brands who are on this symposium now can't even imagine probably a $16 shirt, because we invest so much in the farming and the milling and the yarn development all the way along and want to see fair wages there. So by the time the textile comes to the cut and sew, I don't know. I've never purchased a $16 shirt. I can't, because I slowly accumulate, very slowly, very purposeful documents, even though my income doesn't allow me to go whole hog. So I'm curious, how can we start talking about this argument of like, oh, if we raise the wages, the jobs go away? Why do we keep having to argue that point? And what can we do to keep navigating around that honestly?
So I think one is really important is that remember that like the Dirty Dozen, and I invite you to look at their stock portfolio.
Okay.
Just take a look of a moment of how much these companies are making compared to what garment workers are making.
A differential is just,
the differential is huge. And I think secondly, I do really want to say, right, like anything else, right, our strength come with numbers, So that's why spaces like Fibershed, spaces like Remake, and we're actually now starting to also build a business coalition ourselves that counter that narrative, because what we have learned is actually there's a real interest and thriving interest, and we're in a different generation as well, to want to produce in a different way, right? If you ask Santa, do you care whether this is fast fashion or do you want to be paid $15 an hour, and make less clothes? Which one do you prefer? And Mel, actually, can you ask her this?
Yeah, let's ask that.
Ask her between making $5 an hour and making a lot of clothes to earning $15 an hour and making less clothes, which one does she prefer?
Santa, so le van a hacer la pregunta es que ¿qué escoge? ¿Hacer muchas prendas y ganar $5 la hora o hacer menos prendas y ganar $15 la hora? ¿Qué prefiere?
Pues yo diría el de $15 a la hora.
$15 an hour.
So I think it's really important to remember, workers want sustainability too, because they're the first to experience all of that. They're the first, and I'm talking about right now, it's 45,000 workers, right? We can create that industry. Santa has been in the industry for 15, 16 years. Some of our leaders have been in it for 20, 30 years. These are skills that are not going to disappear. That's why, right? We know other cities have tried to revive skills or, revive their garment industry, but haven't been successful. We remained and stayed despite globalization. And there are reasons, right? And I actually think COVID showed even more that, we want other cities to thrive too, to be clear. I think the whole country can do this, but we need a level playing field. And I think all workers will answer that. I would love to be paid 15 hours and make just slightly less clothes. They will still be producing a lot, trust. I've seen the way, everyone knows how fast folks work, right? But right now it's deeply unjust, the situation.
Yes, and can we ask, Mel, would you mind asking one more question about, what textile Santa likes to work with? Does she like working with, a cotton, a wool? Does she prefer certain things moving through her hands as she works with so much material for hours on end?
Okay, so la pregunta que le están haciendo, Santa, es que qué tipo de textil, material le gusta trabajar con cuál le gusta trabajar, qué le gusta que le pase por las manos.
La
Si no
mezclilla.
algodón o lana. O, ¿qué dijo? ¿Mezclilla?
Mezclilla.
Oh, mezclilla. Okay, jean fabric.
Cotton.
¿Hay otra?
Algodón.
Okay, cotton. For the jean fabric and the cotton.
Nice. Thank you.
Gracias.
Yeah, many.
Ustedes.
Yeah, so, I think we might work slightly less with wool, but wool has other way, right, of becoming summer fabrics. So
we have work to do.
Dile a tu papi que estoy en la junta.
What was that?
She's saying to the kids that she's in the meeting.
Oh, okay. I love watching the feet come up on the door. Handstands, Saturday handstands, and kitties. Very inspiring. So Annie, as we are looking through the Q&A, are there questions you would like to answer? Because there's so many good ones here.
There's quite a few.
Which one resonates with you?
Unions. There's a quite. So I thought that was an interesting question about a labor strike with dock unions, actually. I think it is something that we have been, we definitely explored with Ross in that campaign, and because Ross actually has very, very centralized places. But however, I do think that the organizing was difficult because Ross stores, the warehouses were not organized yet. But those are definitely methods that we have been thinking and organizing. Okay. And especially now with sick like people getting sick in factories, we also have been thinking about changing our campaign into talking about health and safety issues that impact both workers in all level, right? You know, from like in the farm to, you know, in the factories to, you know, obviously warehouses, which we have been hearing a lot. In terms of also, I just want to clarify, this bill is California. So someone was saying that, you know, we'd like to see a fair wage labor industry development in Oakland. Yes, please. And so sign on the petition. Let's get in touch, because I actually, this next phase of our bill, we're relaunching this bill in 2021. You know, we did had a stall defeat this year in California state legislature. But as I tried to explain to folks that if a bill can be passed in a year, the world would be a much better place. And usually legislation changes are not easy. So we're in it in the long haul, because this is not about winning a bill. This is about changing the working condition in our industry. So please get in touch with us, because my next work is actually getting in touch with some of the San Francisco producers.
Wonderful. Annie, we're going to just wrap up. Okay, we can answer these questions, but I want to just say in final, Santa, thank you. Mel, thank you. Annie, thank you. Gracias for your time this morning.
A ustedes, gracias.
Thank you. And so for just to wrap up on the next, what people can do, we have so many people who want to produce ethically. They can get in touch with you, Annie. Do you want to put, just to refresh the chat?
Yes, I will put in all the links possible, right?
And we will send them back out. So if you're a brand or design community member who wants to support the ethical wages, and you're interested in producing with communities who are being, you know, paid appropriately and fairly, it sounds like we can actually start building this new economy together right now. So support is through these links, and I look forward to continuing this conversation as we build momentum and strength and revise and uplift together. Thank you, Annie. Thank you, Santa. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
You too. All right, everybody.
Gracias.
Have a beautiful Saturday.
Bye.
Gracias. And so we're going to go to a 5-minute break. And I think, Gavin, is that all? We'll head back here in 5 minutes.
Yes. I mean, it may be worthwhile just before we do go to the break, if you wanted to consider one of the questions for people to answer in the chat as we hit to break.
Questions in the chat. Okay.
Yeah. No, sorry.
Oh.
The one, what was your favorite fiber? Or maybe if they have places that they would like to send people for ethical or supportive worker environments, it's entirely up to you.
Okay. Well, before we depart, if anyone wants to throw in into the chat anything around actually their favorite textile to work with, that's something that we've had a lot of conversation with the Garment Workers Center on, is, you know, what are we in this community of farming and making, and how can we get that into the hands of well-paid cut and sew community members? And so I'd love to hear, what's your favorite textile? We want to start collecting an understanding of that. Wool and linen. Thanks, Michelle. Cotton and wool. Lindsay Woolsey. All right, keep them coming.